So, good morning, everyone. It's very good to see you here. I know there's lots of things happening in the world right now, but it's really good to have you here for this conversation about empathy, moderation and dialogue, particularly focusing on the situation in Ukraine, but also the many connections to other countries in the region. It's my pleasure to introduce some of the speakers this morning. Our first speaker will be Arvydas Grišinas from the Lithuanian Institute of History. Then what we'll do is we'll have all the presentations in one row, and at the end that means that there's a lot of time for discussion, and that could be between the panelists, but it will also be between you and the panelists. So please write down your questions or your comments or your thoughts as we go along. Our second speaker will be Ieva Šakelaitė from Vilnius University. Then we will have Aušra Gabrielė, also known as Sister Gabrielė, from the Vytautas Magnus University, also in Lithuania. And then finally, we will have Inesa Bunevičienė from Vytautas Magnus University in Lithuania as well. With that, I think Arvydas, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
I am ready. Can you hear me? So my name is Arvydas Grišinas. I'm from Lithuanian Vilnius. Lithuanian History Institute. I wanted to present my ongoing fieldwork on Lithuanian volunteers who bring support to Ukraine. I'm in the middle of a research, and I really appreciate your input and feedback, especially on the conceptual part. I decided to call it Fighting with Empathy because in a sense, their effort to support Ukrainians is a form of fighting, is my core argument. So 3 years having passed since the start of the full-scale invasion, a set of organizations have formed already, and we have sort of a group of full-time volunteers who are committed to supporting Ukraine till hopefully victorious end, although we'll see what that victory will look like. And I thought that not only is it just an important, moment in time to just capture, almost to document, but also it's an interesting case of identity formation. It's an interesting case of new political bonds forming in the region, and an interesting case of agency in a political and social spheres where they interconnect. So what I was interested in studying is, first of all, the motivations of these volunteers, because it's a choice to leave your family behind, to get into dangerous situations. So I was curious, is it adventurism? Is it empathy for the suffering, for those suffering? Is it any other motivation? And of course to observe how this activity and the discourse around it affects political identity in Lithuania, in that group and outside, and how that affects the political discourse. So talking about volunteering motivations, usually we talk in Weberian terms of goal, value, affective, tradition-based motivations that usually refer to people going out there and volunteering in places in need. But there's also talk about societal trust, some sort of society merging, society forging aspect of volunteerism, based also in religious beliefs, sometimes subjective notions of greater good. A good case is Icelandic volunteers Iceland doesn't have an army, as you know, so they volunteer in rescue teams, and they see it as a part, a way of giving to the society, contributing to greater good. And also, I mean, objectively, Iceland would be far more dangerous place without them. And I'm exploring ideas where it's not that a volunteer goes to some place in Africa and helps people he has no connection to, only some ideational or emotional connection, but rather it's help for a neighbor. It's a form of fighting, an indirect fighting, so empathy as a tool for struggle. And I love the term vicarious identification by Professor Budrytė, but I'm exploring that idea. So any other fancy words that you come up with, I'd love to hear too. But so far I've been focusing on my research. I'm doing a survey. I expect to kind of survey around 10% of the volunteers. I'm doing semi-structured interviews that I do by phone, live, or as I go with them on fieldwork. So I'm expecting to go on 5 to 7 fieldwork trips altogether. I've gone to 4 so far. I think that's a good number to aim for. 7 kind of is a good number to aim for. And I'm doing a discourse analysis. I haven't started that bit, but I'm hoping to explore how this volunteerism is articulated, how it's discussed, how it's presented, what is the vocabulary that the volunteer organizations are using. In a sense, how is it framed verbally and discursively as well. So as far as my survey goes, I mean, it's not finished, but you can see a tendency kind of emerging. So take this with a grain of salt, but I think we can do abstract summarization. Summarization, is it a word? Okay, anyway, but so in terms of what they're bringing, they're mostly bringing gear, medicine, and technology, and casual things like food, clothing, chainsaws, shovels, anything goes actually. Organizations usually comprise 2 to 20 people. Often they would start with just good intentions and their bank account, and soon they realize that they have problems with taxation when they gather money into their personal bank accounts. That's why they created funds, and those funds attract, they have a branding that the cause that attracts people. So these organizations form. Mostly, they collaborate between each other sporadically on specific projects in particular cases, and half of them is one type of support focused, and half of them just bring whatever fits in the pickup truck. Motivation-wise, I don't want to get ahead of myself in terms of these evaluations. Right now, I had a few hypotheses. Is it, a historically grounded motivation? Is it empathic motivation? Is it ideologically grounded? Is it something else, adventurism? And I've received answers that kind of agree to all of these to different extents, and kind of quite in an even proportion. So I think it's a bag of these, because it's certainly an adventure, but it's also for a good cause. But it's also, then you also remember that your grandparents were perhaps deported or something, and it kind of adds up to this. And what's interesting is that volunteers understand that their impact is limited, but they still see it as meaningful, and I'll elaborate on that a bit later. And a lot of them mention this empathic element. They believe they understand Ukrainians better. having started volunteering. And of course, mostly they still emphasize security over values. So if I was to pick out one motivational argument that's probably the strongest, is that, you know, if Ukraine falls, we're next. So that's still a very important element, the pragmatic element. Demographics-wise, 1/3 of the volunteers, approximately, volunteers I surveyed are women. Mostly it's 35 to 60-year-olds with families, with children, usually highly educated, usually taking up high positions at work, high professional positions. 100% Lithuanian in my survey, or identifying as Lithuanian ethnically. So diverse professions too. I've gone to 4 expeditions so far. One of them was an introduction to me, in a sense. It was just a bunch of pickup trucks and gear for different military units in Ukraine. We went to Zhytomyr. Then I joined a bunch of skinhead hooligans from Vilnius who went to visit their skinhead hooligans in Lviv, friends in Lviv. But now they're volunteers, and the others are soldiers. And actually, the earlier bond transfers very significantly into a new form. And you know, I got a chance to see this let's say fellowship of warriors, regardless of the ideological inclinations. But this sort of sense of comradeship that only emerges in case you might not see your friends later. So there's a lot of that interesting interaction. Third, I went with a group of IT specialists who, who gather old computers, old gear, old tech, they refurbish it and send it, installing computer classes for schools, installing computer rooms for soldiers, etc. So it's a mixed bag. It's partially military, partially humanitarian. So that's why, you know, this empathy and sense of help comes with a sword as well. And the last trip was this lone wolf mission where just one person packs his car, adds what do you call it? A trailer, yeah. So adds a trailer, stacks 13 mattresses in the trailer, stuffs some other goodies in between the mattresses and the nets, and brings it to a precise point that they're needed. So with these 13 mattresses, a room in a field hospital is filled. He goes back. 2 days later, he can be back with 13 more, and over a week he can install like a level of a field hospital. So this just showed me the acupuncture-like activity of the organizations, and that's their strength. They can bring what is actually needed very quickly to places that actually need it, and do it in a very effective, efficient way. I just have a few pictures to show. I'm exploring the culture itself. Let's say on the left you see a toilet door in one of the crossing points on the border. Where all the organizations that bring all these volunteer organizations, they leave their stickers. You have a Ukrainian host who just took us into his home, and he treated us. So we arrived at 2:00 at night, past the hour. Komendanto valanda. Does anyone? Sorry. Martial law. Thank you so much. passed the martial law, and well, he's waiting with fish and potatoes and hearty food at 2 o'clock. At 3 o'clock we go to sleep. 8 o'clock we get up to go further to Žytomyr. He's already cooking pancakes, having cleaned up the night before. So my insight is that he's treating it as a mission. This is beyond friendship. This is not how you treat your friends. You sleep and your friends go where they need to go. Instead, he gets up and cooks food, and that's more of a that speaks to me of actions beyond friendship. And yeah, so typical pictures. It's a proof that the goods have been delivered to those who are donating, and it's also a statement of comradeship. And some stops at places of significance, but also significance for war. So all towns have these public spaces filled with memorial pictures of their fallen heroes, and volunteers stop by these and kind of visit as a form of pilgrimage almost. So how much time do I have? 2 minutes. Okay, I'll try to wrap it up. So this is the meeting between the soldiers and the skinheads, and their interaction. Visit at the Mars fields in Lviv, the famous cemetery, soldier cemeteries. Exchange of souvenirs over here. Very representative pictures and interactions. The front needs anything almost. So here's me driving on a scooter across the border. They need it in Kherson. A drone is likely to attack a jeep rather than a scooter. So a special operations soldier could take a scooter and be less of a target. There are priests in Lviv that are actively supporting and helping with the logistics. That's the volunteer organization in Ivano-Frankivsk, where we brought the things. Again, memorial visitings and the computers that we bring. That one over there is a solar panel, a portable solar panel that Lithuanians designed and brought to Ukraine. Basically, you spread it out, charge your batteries, but this one got ruined, unfortunately. So some summarizing insights. So I'm playing with the idea of, theoretically, with the idea of shared horizon. So in addition to explaining the motivations, it's about understanding the issue. It's not just feeling others suffering, but it's also understanding the circumstances, issues, so rationalizing empathy in some sense. And of course that vicarious identification of oneself with that suffering. Then, of course, there's plenty of transformative experience, and it's forming a subculture. Volunteers tend to dress in a certain way, speak in a certain way, call Russians in a certain way, and act in a certain way. There's clear utility in being a small, decentralized organization, being the acupuncture principle that I told you. And there are layers of depth of experience and identification. There's one thing to bring a pickup truck to Lviv and pass it on, and there's another experience of driving down into the trenches and giving, a box of candy to a soldier in a trench. So there are layers of intensity of this transitory experience. So what's next? I'll do some more deeper fieldwork, more interviews. I'll do the discourse analysis online. I hope to produce recommendations and some publications, recommendations for the military, Lithuanian military and Ministry of Defense, and a final picture for the atmosphere when you enter at dawn, when you enter Ukraine at dawn. Thank you.
So thank you for that. Our next speaker, Ieva, will be talking about artistic expressions of solidarity and how this expresses collective action. I believe that the presentations are all readied, so the floor is yours, Ieva.
Hi everyone. I'm doing my PhD at Vilnius University, and today I'd like to present just a part of my dissertation argument. So it's just a work in progress. So in spring 2022, when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, Lithuanians, as many other Europeans, went out into the streets to express their solidarity with Ukrainians. And among the usual gatherings on the streets and in the squares, there were also a lot of events that were exceptionally visual and exceptionally aesthetically charged. Because the participants were using artificial blood, they were enacting various scenarios, they were singing. And before this, such artistic activism or artivism in Lithuania was not that common. It was most often associated with certain artists who engage with political issues and do some performances in public space. But the artivism in support of Ukraine, it summoned actually a lot of general public, and there were also some experienced artists engaged in it, but in general it was like very various. And in general, these protests, this artivism was a departure from a politically quite solemn publics in Lithuania. And very broadly speaking, studies on artivism, most often they focus on this antagonistic principle. Artivism usually criticizes the status quo, it criticizes the establishment, and for instance, drawing on Chantal Mouffe, artistic practices either participate in maintaining the existing hegemonic order and symbolic order, or resist it, and then become the so-called critical art. But what is interesting, most of these performances in support of Ukraine, they did not anticipate this conflict with the authorities, since the Lithuanian government has been quite unanimous in its support of Ukraine. So they were not resisting anything within our local hegemony, so to say. And instead of looking at this protest in this resistance paradigm that's so prevalent in visual studies, I propose still seeing them as something productive of political subjectivity and of a collective agency. So I base this suggestion on such thinkers as Hannah Arendt and Judith Butler, who state that increased visibility in public space is related to political recognition, to political subjectification, and also agency. And today I would like to narrow down on one performance called Ukrainian Hill. Here you can see the main organizers of the performance. And I would like to show how the main topics and visual language of this performance suggest that it is not only a performance of solidarity, but it also communicates vulnerability and vulnerability ties between Ukraine and Lithuania. So as Judith Butler proposes, vulnerability is the body's susceptibility, its openness to both the material and the political and social conditions and infrastructures. So they argue that when support structures break down, when threats emerge, such as wars in the region, vulnerability becomes more apparent and relevant. But what Butler does, they are suggesting that vulnerability is empowering because recognition of one's vulnerability can mobilize people beyond their immediate political identity. So vulnerability is a foundation for solidarity and collective agency in this case. So for me, it is important that such a notion of collective agency then challenges this resistance paradigm, as it does not presuppose this autonomous subject who is tough and independent, independent of social relations, for instance, and who just decides to act and resist. So this notion of agency that is based on vulnerability is more rooted in the idea of relationality of human beings, that everyone is connected, and this connectedness structures our actions too. And in general, vulnerability and care, which is also really related to this term, have historically been neglected as political action. So for instance, Hannah Arendt suggested that private matters have to be left out of the public space so that real political action can take place. And feminist care ethics is one of the research fields that question this. So for instance, feminist care ethicians, they suggest that caring for oneself, caring for others is a way to sustain one's physical and emotional well-being in politically turbulent times. So care ethics then is directly connected to this idea of vulnerable body that needs care, and without treating vulnerability as a disadvantage, but rather seeing it an essential part of living together in communities. So according to care ethics, care can also be a form of this political agency. And now I'd like to zoom in to the performance. It was called Ukrainian Hill in English, and it took place in the biggest park of Vilnius, Vingis Park. It was planned as this collective effort to build a small hill for Ukraine, and anyone interested could join in. So anyone could, for instance, bring the soil. When the hill was complete, the hill was planted with flowers, so anyone could come in and plant the flowers, which were also in the colors of Ukrainian flag. This event, it extended to a few days, and in this way it also pointed towards the fact that the war will last and has to be endured with patience. And the Lithuanian name of the title of the performance is Išgyventi, which literally means to live through. So there's also this extended temporality to it. In the short video that was released after the performance, and it was also an important part of it, there's this focus on collective caring body. So there's no clear focus on the faces, for instance, of the participants, but it focuses more on the gestures and on the plurality and the fact that there were a lot of people who came in and pitched in. There was also this clear symbolism of death and life. And the hill itself, it also in some parts symbolized a grave. So we can see in the footage where organizers prepared the site for the performance, there was the site was marked with the square cross. So there's also this ritual dimension to it. And the invitation that was shared on social media, in the invitation it was stated that the flowers are planted in honor of all of those lost in the war. So solidarity with Ukrainians is especially intimate because burying is most often performed by the nearest, by the closest family members. So it also suggests that those killed in the war are in some sense ours. And it's also interesting that for the performance, some soil from Bucha, from the place where hundreds of civilians were massacred, tortured, and there was also a lot of sexual violence there. So some soil from Bucha was used alongside the Lithuanian soil. And it was done in some sense to ritually heal the soil. As one of the organizers, she's an influencer and a photographer, Neringa Rekashiūtė, she wrote on her Facebook wall that the soul is so gray, it is suffering so much, but now it is safe and folded by our hill. What is interesting is that the subject that needs care in the face of the war and who feels vulnerable is also the local Lithuanian public. And the invitation to the performance states this intention to not only bury the lost Ukrainians and pay respects to them, but also process own emotions and bury them. So in the invitation on Facebook and on other social media, it was said that we are inviting everyone to go through all of these emotions together and bury our bodies of pain in the soil. So the performance is constructed not only as an act of solidarity with Ukrainians, but also as a means to represent and deal with the stark emotions of Lithuanians. And I'd say that this focus on suffering it invites a closer reflection. So the scholar Lili Čiauliariakė, she has explored this notion of so-called post-humanitarian imagination of solidarity. So she argues that in recent decades, the main focus of solidarity and solidarity communication the main focus become the feelings of those who are noticing the suffering others. So solidarity then originates in looking at the mirror and in looking at own emotions instead of confronting the pain of the others, the representations of the pain of others and distant, vulnerable others. And this is, of course, problematic because this hyper-focus on how we feel when facing the pain of others poses a risk of appropriating, in some sense, the suffering of those in the actual war. So seeing demonstrations and the artivism as an expression of this post-humanitarian discourse complicates the idea of the protests as this collective action of unconditional solidarity with the suffering vulnerable others. But the framework that Čiauliariakė proposes, it is based on solidarity between global South and global North. So the vulnerable other is culturally and historically distant. And if we place the case of Ukrainian Hill in a post-colonial framework, so both Lithuania and Ukraine historically were colonized by the same imperial power. So scholars have argued that post-communist national identities have often been constructed through this sense of victimhood. And it was essential for this identity coherence. So the performance, in some sense, is reproducing this familiar positionality of a victim for Lithuanians, but at the same time, it's employing this recognizable myth that structures national identity. And this is one of the reasons why I suggest that the performance is operating on these hegemonic terms. But what I've tried to show today is that even if these actions in public space don't resist local hegemony per se, they still are politically productive. They bring care into visibility. They foster horizontal ties, even though there is this problematics behind it. And they also build this affective solidarity among post-imperial subjects of the Soviet Empire. And also, even though this artivism is, of course, primarily about supporting Ukraine, it is also very much about this local political collective subject that gets re-articulated during such gatherings in public space. And here, Arvydas already mentioned the vicarious identification by the scholar Dovilė Budrytė, so I think it's also the case of that. Thank you. That was all.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Sister Gabrielė, and she will bring in a more theological perspective to this conversation, which is new to me this morning. I'm really excited to hear about this.
So good day, dear colleagues. Nice to see you in here. As you heard, have you heard? The theme of our presentation is East-West unity and international communion in the context of the war in the Ukraine, a theological perspective. It is certainly a very important topic at the moment. The outbreak of a war in Ukraine raises many questions about the posture of the international community, and attempts are being made to analyze the current challenges from the different fields of research. In this context, the question arises, what should be the unity and international communion between East and West in the face of this war, analyzed from the theological perspective? The aim is to present the features of unity between East and West, recalling the foundations of international communion in the face of the war in Ukraine in the context of social ethics, and raising the necessary of moral laws. In order to present the features of unity between East and West mentioned before, it is therefore necessary to briefly introduce the fundamental principles of the unity of the human family. Only after a brief presentation of these will we be able to describe the features of the unity between East and West and the international foundation of communion. Finally, in order to answer the question, what must be done from a theological perspective, that is, from a social ethic perspective, to ensure an international order that will guarantee peace among peoples? The unity of the human family has its roots in the Bible. Already in the first chapters of Genesis, of creation, there the God of Israel is the Lord of the history and the cosmos. The unity of human family is emphasized, where man is not created in isolation, has his or her place and task in it. So, it's not created in isolation, but it is integral part of creation. The goal of creation is those harmonies, and everyone has his or her place in task in it. So all creation is harmonious, and everyone has his or her place and task in it. Man's task is not only to be possessor of the world created by the great architect, but also a subdue to the word through fruitfulness. Specifically, after the covenant with Noah, God promises humanity the blessing and protection of fertility. But possession does not mean violation of unity, which is the human family living together for the common good and maintaining peace by sharing the spiritual and mental wealth of the world. That is, all the sources available in creation. But the question here is, what should be basis for the peace that can be mentioned in the context of a human family? That is, in the context of the whole world. Here we must highlight the theological foundations of the unity of mankind, which will provide the answer to this question we have asked. The first one is the emphasis on returning to a relationship with the Creator. Genesis established God's covenant with Abraham, opening the way for humanity to return to God. This covenant becomes the first basis for unity of humanity. Jesus becomes the second new foundation for human unity. This is a New Testament perspective which again highlights the likeness of humanity to God, as it has been since the beginning of creation. Then man is created imago Dei, in the image and likeness of God. And this likeness is restored in the person of Jesus Christ, through God and through man. The whole life of Jesus and his moral teaching, which has not been surpassed or transcended, but by anyone for 2,000 years, is the gospel of unity, not an encyclopedia that can only be read and learned from, but the life itself, the living word, which permeates the whole life of a person. This gospel of unity is brought to reality through the church, through the action of the Holy Spirit in the realization of his divine plan. That is not to say in the restoration of humanity's unity with God and with each other. In this way, the third foundation of unity can be highlighted, the action of the Holy Spirit, who through the bond of love restores humanity's presence together. But this requires the basic rules of coexistence of the international community, which are rooted in the foundations of the human unity of a human family. Three can also be identified. So the first rule is based on the fundamental elements for the genuine international community and is the centrality of the human person and the nature tendency of humanity towards unity. The second rule, the coexistence of peoples, is based on the same values that govern relations between people. This is truth, justice, active solidarity, and freedom. The third rule is that international laws became the guarantee of international order. It can be seen, therefore, that from the many principles of unity of the human family that have been mentioned of the basis of the theological foundations of the unity of humanity, the basis rules of coexistence of the international community, one fundamental principle of the family and humanity can be extracted, namely the principle, what do you think about it, of peace, which based on the principle of a peaceful relationship with God, with yourself, and the world. The unity of the human family is also the source of the unity between nations, which includes East and West, sovereignty and justice. Thus, each East-West state has its own sovereignty without being subordinated by the international community, which means that in order to achieve unity between nations, Ukraine must not lose its sovereignty and its state either. For such a denial and suppression of freedom, it is opposite of unity among peoples. This is why there is need for justice, which is guarantee of unity among peoples. Justice is a prerequisite for achieving the idea of universal fraternity. In this context, it is useful to remember that the limitation of a power is an idea inherent in the very concept of law. Justice affirms one of the principles of cooperation, namely to give to everyone what is due, not only in terms of material goods, such as sovereignty state, the home, etc., but also in terms of immaterial goods, such as freedom, the right to live in dignity, peace, etc. So this is verse for Saint Francis. Now we are having in the funeral of this moment. In the unity East and West, this justice is not transgressed or destroyed, as is the case of Ukraine, where peace and all other rights have been abolished without forgetting the human being himself as the most precious value. This is an example of how the characteristics of unity between peoples are being destroyed, and the lessons that should be learned by the East and the West, which should not forget the concept of a Declaration of Human Rights signed in 1948. Of course, these virtues of unity among peoples are even more so in the foundations of international communion, which are in the close contact with, and rather answer to the question of the validity of moral laws. These foundations consist of the following ethical relevant components. What you see here, the contact between love and truth, the danger of the absence of truth, development of all kinds, such as human, economic, etc., fraternity and civil society, rights and duties, the environment, cooperation among mankind, pro-solidarity, subsidiarity, and the importance of faith in it, technology, such as manufacture of weapons, etc. In order to consolidate an international order that ensures peace between nations, the same moral laws that govern relations between people are necessary for relations between nations. That is truth, justice, active solidarity, and freedom, without forgetting the human being as the greatest value. So thank you so much for your attention.
Inesa, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I'm Inesa Bunevičienė, and here today I'm about to present you some data from our project, international project. We are working at Vytautas Magnus University with our team. And before I start, I really wanted to thank my colleague Šakelaitė, who is co-author of this presentation, who invited me to collaborate on this topic. While all the presentations here were quite different, but I believe that one thing what connects and unites all of us is the search of some new tools, some new ways how to preserve and how to safeguard human values in the new environment we found ourselves, like new risks, new global risks, geopolitical uncertainties, and so on and so forth. And in this presentation, I will focus on dialogue and power of dialogue. I will question the power of dialogue as one of the ways how to connect us in a moment of digital disruption. So I'm not going to focus on Ukraine war in this presentation. However, I believe that dialogue is a concept which might be useful and which can be applied in different contexts. So before I begin, I think it's very important to define what we mean and how we understand dialogue. While in the literature we can find different kinds of definitions, and some of them are quite broad, other authors decide to choose some narrower perspectives. We follow the idea of Oliver Escobar, who distinguishes, who separates clearly dialogue and deliberation.
meaning that dialogue is not something what is necessarily leading us to decision making, but instead it's an open place, an open-ended engagement where we as a society members, where we as a citizens might discuss, might openly share our experiences without judgment, without pressure, and so on and so forth. So this is a kind of a dialogue we are discussing in our project and in this presentation. Also, we recognize dual nature of dialogue. From one point of view, we see dialogue as a very important concept. However, we have to recognize dialogue as an interaction, as a practice. And we see that while it is important to recognize the role of dialogue in the society, the conceptual level, it is also vital to find appropriate ways to apply in practice. And we think, and we'll see the data shows us, that while in conceptualizing, we experts and literature see the dialogue, the power of dialogue and importance of dialogue. But in practice, there are so many difficulties and so many questions. How do we make the dialogue work? How do we connect society? How do we connect society and policymakers, let's say? Another thing, another proposition which we base our presentation on is that dialogue is some kind of road to the acknowledgement of and constructing of truth. So if we agree that truth is social construct, we must also agree that dialogue is necessary for truth to emerge. So, and we believe that some actors in this dialogue must take some more responsibility in a way that they engage and they empower our society. And here we talk about epistemic authority, another concept we use, referring to different professions, experts, policymakers, but also teachers, also librarians, medical doctors, and other professionals who in some way can support our life, make it easier and help us in risk situations. Also, epistemic authority, as we call them here, truth keepers, we believe that they, in a traditional media environment, were understood as those who know more, who keeps, if we can say that they keeps the truth, and their responsibility is to share the truth with others, so that not really the share, to connect a society together, that in the interaction the truth could be born. However, what happens today is, with all the new media environment, the digital disruption manifesting in different ways and increasing disinformation, polarization, different kind of artificial intelligent biases, cancel culture, and other things, what is happening, we see that these connections, which we can see here in this visualization, and the truth keepers who used to gravitate society towards them, this time of mechanism is starting to malfunction. What is happening is that truth keepers do not have all the information anymore. So if until now we could say that it was normal for people to look at the epistemic authority and listen to them, now that information and knowledge is available online. Everyone can see it, everyone can read it, everyone can share it, right? So this is the first thing which changes the dynamics between society and truth keepers. Another thing is that together with digital technologies, society find new ways, new sources where to find the information, and new kind of actors actually attract society's attention instead. And we see that we are losing these connections between the truth keepers and the society, and we see it as a problem. In our, here I'm going to share with you some data from our study. First of all, we analyzed, we performed content analysis of Lithuanian codes of ethics in order to see how epistemic authority values and principles are documented. And then in another stage, we also performed focus groups. In total, we did 14 focus groups, but here I'm going to present results only from 4 of them, where we discussed and questioned different experts, journalists, teachers, social scientists, NGO representatives, and other representatives of other professions. And the idea of this presentation is to look how the truth is perceived in the documents and in the and by the experts. We discussed it, and how the dialogue as the tool to construct the truth is seen. What we did with the data, we analyzed it applying MaxQDA software. Both strategies, inductive and deductive, were applied. And here we can see some data from content analysis of codes of ethics. Deductive approach was main in this part. So in collaboration with our partners, we came up with theory-based codes, and we identified 8 main themes. And according to these themes, we analyzed the documents, the codes of ethics, and what we can see, truth-telling and evidence-seeking was one of the most prominent themes found in Lithuanian codes on ethics. 201 text unit was coded under this theme, while another one closest is sensitive issues 124, and others were also mentioned. But what we can see is that truth is actually seen as very important principle in these documents. However, we also noticed that while truth is mentioned and truth is conceptualized there, often it is discussed as a concept rather than interaction. What I mean by this is that documents usually mention, for instance here, the essential feature of ethical journalism is the truthfulness and integrity of the information and opinion published. So there is acknowledgement that truth is important. However, only minority in the minority of the documents we can see acknowledgement that dialogue is necessary for truth to be constructed. So in other words, truth is seen as something what is stable. It's not necessarily invites for discussion, and so on. So another thing we did is we looked again to the documents and tried to figure out how documents acknowledge the dialogue. And following our conceptualization of the dialogue as an interaction and dialogue as a concept, we found that in 137 units of text, the dialogue was seen as interaction, meaning that there was some kind of invitation for the public to discuss the principles, for instance, or to react to breach of the code, of the main principles listed in the code. However, interestingly, only 18 out of 137 text units were found in journalistic codes of ethics, while the others, I think it's, yes, 119, were found in different kind of code of ethics. I didn't mention, but we, besides of journalistic code of ethics, we also included in our study some public institutions, and some private sector organizations, and the findings were very interesting, actually. So another thing is that 13 units of text were dealing with dialogue as a concept. Interestingly, 7 out of 30 were found in the codes of journalistic ethics. So what we see that journalistic ethics usually see truth, dialogue, I'm sorry, as a concept, not as an interaction. In other words, they see it as something they do not need to work, something what is stable. And this might be a little problematic, we think. Now, coming to the focus groups, as I already said, we had in total 14 groups. 4 of them I'm discussing here in this presentation. We approached focus groups and the data there from the inductive approach, and that means that we read the transcripts and tried to see what the respondents actually were talking about, what principles, ethical values and problems they saw. And based on that, we made this kind of maps, also using MaxQDA. And here we can see that truth and truth-telling also was one of the fundamental and mostly recognized principles discussed by the participants, close to the empathy and compassionate listening, or inclusivity and equality. However, very interestingly, our respondents saw truth not as a stable element, not as a stable something. They saw it as a problematic and constructive thing. For instance, one of the respondents said that it is very important to be brave to tell the truth, that it is necessary to fight for the truth. I quote, "When it comes to sensitive issues and when they are on public agenda, we need to use the moments better, because this is when you can get attention. Don't be afraid to speak up and raise questions. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get public attention." Or talking about disinformation. But right now, the United States of America has become such a minefield and such a vast social experiment. What will happen when we give free speech to people who speak that language of violence? So these kind of examples, I believe, show that our respondents, in contrast to the documents, what we found in the documents, they believe that truth needs to be fight for, that we have protected the truth, that it's not easy to tell the truth. And we also investigated and wanted to see what kind of problems do they see for truth and dialogue to be constructed. And polarization was one of the biggest issue. However, polarization as concept was not necessarily mentioned. Usually our respondents used us and them concept, and understood polarization as very complex, multidimensional thing. So to conclude, I don't know if I am too long or too short. To conclude, we propose that what is happening now in this public sphere and what is happening with the relationship between the society and the epistemic authority is actually something like I call here the rebound effect. That society who is trying to reach out for epistemic authority and trying to find answers, share knowledge, usually do not get feedback. And that's why they are starting to look for the answer somewhere else. And today's environment is very good for that, right? We have new agents claiming epistemic authority like influencers. We have alternative media channels. And this new environment actually supports the relationship between society and these new kind of epistemic authorities. And this can be problematic because this strong relationship means that this relationship is becoming weaker and weaker. So the question is, what do we do here? Because if we lose the connection between those epistemic authority who actually trust in science, who actually construct their truth based on the research, on the history, right? Then I believe that we have great risks for our democracy, for our future. So the question is, what do we do and how do we make sure that this connection is restored, is restarted, and how do we support it? That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all of our panelists. Before we dive into the discussion, I just wanted to draw out one or two points and see if you might, share a reflection on it. The first is the notion of empathy itself. I think what I've heard in each of your presentations in a different way is this empathy oriented at the universal or at the particular, or in some ways holding together both? I think the second thing I've heard is this oriented on the self, on your feelings, or is it oriented on the feelings of others? And I think the third one is how is it then expressed? But the fourth one, which actually seems more and more important, is this question of truth. And what do we do with this constellation of dialogue, empathy, solidarity, when we do not have a shared basis for our understanding of truth? And some might say, well, there have always been, different understandings of truth. Here in Europe, people might say some truths are based in science, some might be based in religion. I think that's a bit of an overemphasized binary, but still, when we look at the current moment where we have these different authorities, epistemic authorities, these different sources of truth, what is the dialogue, what is the solidarity, but also what is the empathy that we're actually looking for? So I just want to give you all an opportunity to reflect on that, and then we'll draw in questions from the room. Shall we?
I can start. So, yes, I left the open question there, but I believe that this relationship, which needs strengthening between the epistemic authority and society, of course, is based on the question of empathy. Based on the question of openness, and the question of how the epistemic authority can and should open up for a public and for their emotions and for their knowledge too. I believe that another thing which is making things harder is arrogancy. Arrogancy, yes. That there is a big this look from up to the down to the people, right? Without the need to listen to them, to reflect to their feelings, and I believe that this is what the public actually needs. So another thing I think it's very important to distinguish, which I did in my presentation, is that deliberation and dialogue is two different things. So when the politician, let's say, or not politicians or scientists or any of the epistemic authority would say that we are speaking constructively, we are sharing facts. Yes, of course, it's important, but also it's another ability to speak with the public, to listen attentively with a compassion and to hear them in one another way. Yeah, and this kind of the dialogue is just more listening, not oriented to the decision making.
Yeah, okay. Two sort of theoretical notes on empathy, whether it's, empathy as a universal concept or towards particulars. I think it's both. We certainly feel empathy towards things we understand. So we are more likely to feel empathy towards particulars that are closer to us in a certain way. However, I think without a universal as such, there would not be empathy at all. But that's just a very theoretical level. But also, that's what I'm kind of interested in, empathy not as feeling and not as feelings, but empathy as understanding, and that's why I refer to Dilthey, and I'm curious about the rational aspect of empathy, understanding the horizon of problems that another's engaged with, recognizing its seriousness, helping that. So it's an operational, reflexive, empathic action is what interests me. And a very quick note on truth. I think truth and post-truth and problems with truth is an English-speaking problem, because, well, in Lithuanian we can translate it as tiesa, that's uttered truth. We speak tiesa. There's tikrovė, that's ontological truth, truth that is truthfulness in present. And I would even say teisybė, which refers to justice. So it's the truth inadequacy of how, so there's something truthful about the fact that it fell, not referring to Newton, but in principle, So the principle of truthful, how things fall together. And so I think the cultural and political crisis that we're in can be resolved in expanding our notion of what we consider to be truthful, or truth in principle. Yeah.
Okay. So I was in my mind. So go around many things now at the moment, because you touch on the same religious and non-religious question in the side, and it's always ask me, sister, what you thinking about this? We have many words. For example, truth, empathy, justice, and so on. So if you answer the question, you are religious. Why is reason you talk about this? So I think so is not the background, the source for the site. It's a source that, first of all, everyone, we are a human. We come back, but we are persons. And normally, I am person, and I'm a human. So as empathy is coming because I am a human. And empathy, I think so, is a choosing this way, I am choosing, became more human. So it's a little bit, it's go to another side. So, and the same, if you talk about justice, I'm not saying I'm religious and I'm talking about justice. No, I'm talking about justice because I am person. So in everything, in a truth and other kind for the words, I think so. So it's a big, huge, other topic in the site, I think so. So I'm maybe stop because I'm just go on. So this is, thank you.
Yeah,
I think empirically speaking, it's quite clear that no issue has mobilized Lithuanian publics as much as Ukraine question. So it's problematic to talk about this altruistic universal empathy and solidarity in this case, because there are currently a lot of other conflicts that were not addressed as much by our publics. But on the other hand, I don't think it's very productive to talk about if it's genuine or not. It's maybe more interesting for me as a researcher to look into maybe power structures that are creating this solidarity and that are underlying this and underlying this will of the people to go out into the streets and express their strong emotions, which are in some sense genuine. They're not acted out. Yeah.
Thank you. I wonder if there's any questions from the room. Yes. There's a microphone coming. There you go.
Yeah, okay, so my name is Laima Vince, and I wanted to say, that was a really powerful presentation. And for the first 2 years of the war, I was actually collecting interviews and oral histories with various grassroots level volunteer groups who were really just felt called to go to Ukraine and volunteer, just like the Lone Wolf organization. And I also had a long interview with Jonas Oman from Blue Yellow. So all of this I compiled into a book called Angel of Maidan, Ukrainian Voices in War. And, and I'll be happy after the session, I could show you the link to the book. But I was very curious because when I first started working on this book, I was really focusing on small individual efforts and small grassroots groups. And then eventually I got to Jonas Oman and Blue Yellow, which is a very, it's a very large, well-organized organization at this point. And so I was wondering how Blue Yellow plays into the research you're doing, or if you were seeing it as something maybe more, more in a different category from all the grassroots volunteer efforts that you're working with in your research.
Thank you. Should I respond? Thank you very much for the comment, and I'll certainly look up the book. I think I've seen it. I'm a very visual person. I need to see the cover. I'll recognize it. Yeah, regarding Blue and Yellow, I think it's still a grassroots organization. It's just that it's the oldest one. It's the central one. So what I did not kind of touch upon in the presentation is indeed the difference in size, difference in agency. I could have elaborated a little bit on that. So I would say there are three categories. There are central organizations, and they're central in terms of capital, in terms of size, or in terms of impact, reach, digital reach, clout. And then there are the majority, numerically, majority of others that are kind of in the second circle, and then there's these lone wolf people or sporadic ad hoc volunteers that take a truck and just drive it off to Kyiv and then come back, and that's it. So there are, I would say, three layers. I think it just provides to the richness of this ecosystem, if you like. Thank you very much.
I think just reflecting on one of the things that you said, the language of lone wolf, of course, we know from extremism and from terrorist studies, and I wonder if the language of ad hoc would be more appropriate in the context of empathy and support and the solidarity that you're describing. But that just as a side note.
Thank you. I kind of like that lone wolf because a lot of those lone wolves are former military or they've had battle experience in some sense. And then titling themselves as not as a peaceful, but a bit of a predator. He kind of creates, the person I was going with kind of has this alter ego of a cat that has sharp nails. So a bit of edginess is in order. but thanks because I certainly did not have that nuance in my mind. Thank you very much.
So I have a question for my colleague from Vytautas University. You know, for me it's very interesting for your topic about the dialogue, because the background of a dialogue is a truth. So what you're thinking, how we keep the truth without, also how we keep the dialogue without truth?
That's a good question.
Yeah, really, I know, because it's very interesting, you know, to me about this perspective.
That's a good question, but I think that today's environment, in today's environment, we have many examples of how the dialogue, or maybe not dialogue, but some kind of communication is happening, and not necessarily the truth is the center of it. So how do we keep the dialogue? I think that is a good question, but I would formulate it in a little bit different way. How do we make sure that the center of dialogue is the truth? So, and this would be the aim of the research, to find out the solutions, what to do and who is responsible, but also all the epistemic authorities I've been talking about should try to find the way how to keep the truth in the center of a dialogue.
Maybe you have for example, you know, one example, you know, what to...
Kristina, do we have any
connection, you know, because for me it's very interesting, you know, how to find the way, the connection, yeah.
I think in this context, it is also worth thinking of the role of the World Council of Churches and the role of the Vatican in, you know, brokering or not quite brokering the dialogue that one would otherwise expect between religious communities. And it's been really, really sad to see that a place like the World Council of Churches has been so ineffective and unwilling almost, it seems, to be the broker because of all sorts of political sensitivities. We can understand that, but if these bodies cannot deliver on their basic mission statement, then, you know, where else would we turn? And the same for the Vatican. I mean, there was this moment at the start of the war with this Ukrainian and this Russian woman, and it was all meant to express some sort of, you know, we cry for all the mothers who lose their sons. And while there might be truth in that, there was this unwillingness initially to say who the aggressor was. And I think there is a really important point here, like how do we think of the role of religion as some of these truth keepers or truth protectors when they're not naming the basic facts of a war?
Yes, if I may add to this, as I mentioned in my presentation, being truthful means being brave. So it's not easy, right, to make this choice, to stay to communicate the truth, right? So your examples, I think, actually is about that it is not easy to
stay with truth, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's another question here in the room, I believe, here in the front left. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say that in a world that's so filled with disinformation these days, the disinformation seems to fly in every direction, that it was so wonderful to listen to Ieva's presentation about building a mountain, to do something so positive, something so giving, and to have a formal monument to what is going on. Is somehow it's a way to fight disinformation, to fight the lies that are lying, excuse the language, but the lies that are flying at us at all directions, that you do something positive, something that incorporates the living and the dead and let them all contribute to that. There's something very touching about that, so I really appreciated that.
Any other comments or questions from the room? There's one more question.
Thank you very much for all the presentations, and my colleague who was presenting a piece of our joint research. I think it was fascinating to listen to all and to feel this joint focus on the values that we were talking about, the universal values which are important on different levels, on the level of support to Ukraine, on the level of thinking about our existential purpose here, on the level of activism, on the level of human interaction in the form of a dialogue or non-dialogue. And I think that it's a great platform for us as researchers to also think about the values and the importance of values in our research. So I'm very much appreciative for Arvydas, such an academic activism. Yeah, doing a great job indeed, and each of you sharing and talking about these critical cases, phenomena. Yes, I think the power of dialogue exists here as well, and shows that while sharing, while listening, while appreciating what is being done, we can contribute to a better society too. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You wanted to respond briefly?
I had a few of my own questions, but do we have time for that?
If you can pick one, that would be
Okay. Well, okay. Then Ieva, I have a provocation a little bit. You mentioned, appropriation of the suffering of others. I was wondering, can we avoid appropriating the suffering of others if we are to empathize with them? Isn't artistic expression a form of understanding? And should we really be afraid of appropriating things, especially suffering, especially when our intention, and I emphasize intention, is to help, to somehow reverberate?
Yeah, I'd like to maybe not use the language of should or should not. So I'm not interested in saying what's wrong or right in this case, but I think it's a little bit complicated to see Lithuanian bodies painted with wounds, for instance, and communicating that, like pretending that they are Ukrainians and that they are suffering. I think we can look into this from like more academic perspective and see how it could be problematic. But I'm not saying that it's wrong or right.
I think we should probably draw to a close fairly soon. I just wanted to finish with one more thought based on some of the other panels I've heard this week, and that's really the idea of presence and coming alongside. And I think this is also something that's so foundational about dialogue and about empathy, that it's not just something done in the distance, but there is something very real and embodied about it, and near and present. And I think there's all sorts of resonances to religion that can be made from that starting point, but not only to religion. I think some of the other presentations have shown different forms of coming alongside, and I just really want to thank you for your comments and your thoughts and your presentations. I think it offers some great thoughts for us to reflect on that more existential layer, or register, as one of you has already commented. And with that, I would like to ask you to join me in thanking our panel.